In this video, photographer Garry Rose demonstrates how to photograph artwork to the members of Northside Art Association. With Gary's instructions, you can create a professional photograph of your artwork using tools that most everyone already has in their homes. Garry Rose has over 20 years of professional photography experience. Creating all of his photography in the camera, his images are never digitally altered. A master of color and lighting, Gary's photos are deeply saturated, brilliant, and rich in color. As a commercial photographer, Garry has an extensive portfolio. He has performed hospital biomedical photography, scientific photography for an aerospace company, was the corporate photographer for TWA and American Airlines, and helped design and produce a panoramic camera. Learn more about Garry Rose at www.photosbyrose.com. And now, photographer Garry Rose.
What I'm going to show you how to use tonight is using tools that everyone would have in their home. I know you don't have $500 a piece strobes with light boxes and all this, so I'm going to show you how to do 90% as good a job with 10% the cost of doing it. So there's always a one of those diminishing returns. I can just be totally neurotic and get 5% more out of what I'm trying to do with 100% more effort to get there. So this is probably going to get you 90% of the way there, and unless you're going to actually use the images that you're taking to like reproduce and make big prints, this is going to be more than adequate to like email to somewhere for a juried show or to get into it or whatever. Okay?
How big of a print could you make from it?
It depends on your camera. I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on the resolution of your camera. But what is most important if you're really going to make a good blow-up print is that you want all of your camera angles to be just right and your aspect ratios to be correct and the color to be correct. And we're going to get 90% of the way there by what I'm showing you without any kind of exotic equipment. Okay, so looking at your little cheat sheets here, there's three major steps to doing this. One is to align your camera to the work, which is the hardest part of all of this, and then to light the work evenly, and then to expose an image that will record the correct color and saturation of your work. So I'm going to start out by showing you how to align the camera to your work. First of all, I'm at a slight disadvantage here because I wrote these assuming that your work was going to be hanging on a wall and not a table where there's nothing to bang up against underneath. So I'm going to be faking some of this, okay? All right. So the first thing you're going to want to do is figure out where the center of your image is on your artwork. So on the drawing in the back I showed you, what I would normally do is I would just use a piece of Scotch tape on each corner like this and stretch a string diagonally across, and where it crossed would be the center of the piece of work. But I'm going to wing it tonight and cheat by using a yardstick. So if this, I'm using the outside frame for my measurements. Okay, it's 22.5, so that's going to be 11.25. And I'm just going to stick this on here at 11.25. I'm using high-tech pink star Post-its. You can tell that's a professional thing. Amateurs wouldn't use the pink ones. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing down here. 11.25.
Do you always do this inside, or
I
do you
do.
do any of it outside?
No, always inside. You want to be able to control your light, and outside you're sort of at the mercy of whatever's going on. Okay. So if you wanted to use the sunlight, you can. but I'm going to show you a relatively inexpensive way to do that differently. Okay, so we've decided that that's going to be the vertical. Let's see how close I got it to being the same top and bottom. Pretty darn close, okay. I have high precision post-its, is why that's possible. And a runway plumb bob. Okay, this way is 18, so we're going to go down 9 inches. Like I said, a string is a lot handier, but I didn't want to stick tape or anything on anybody's artwork. 9 inches. And if this were hanging on a wall, it would be vertical like this, which is what we want it to be. But we're just going to work with this the way it is for right now. So we're going to drop a plumb bob to the floor. Pretend like this is butted up against the floor, against the wall. And we would push that there. So now that's against the wall, directly under the center line of the piece of work, the artwork. And now all I'm doing is extending that line out a little farther so I know where it's at out here by just using the yardstick. Lens
The same height.
on the horizontal plane at the exact same height as the center of the work of art. So I'm just going to measure this, and it's at approximately 54 inches. Okay, and move in a bit. Okay, so the image is now centered in my lens. I'm going to turn this off for a minute. So in theory, you now have your camera aligned to the center work of your art. This is a lot easier for me when I'm at home or in my studio or whatever, because I would have it on the wall. I could drop plumb bobs, everything would just, I'm kind of winging this as we go here, so. Okay, your question about the lens.
No, distance.
Distance. Okay. The answer is the lens, is why I said the lens.
Yeah, the answer is.
Okay. If you're going to do this as well as you can, you would use a lens that would be either a normal, like a 50mm lens, or slightly longer, like an 85mm lens, or a macro lens. Macro lens would be your best choice because they're flat field lenses. So the distance would be dependent on the angle of your lens and the size of the work. If you have a zoom lens, you would want the lens to be zoomed out to close to its longer length. But give yourself some room so that you can zoom in and out to size the image a little bit, but make it about 3/4 of the way out to the maximum of your zooming distance. Zooms tend to, unless you have really expensive zooms, and modern zooms are much better, but they tend to have what's called barreling or pin cushioning. And if you watch a straight line, if you put a straight line near the edge of your viewfinder and you zoom the lens, you'll see that straight line go from this to the opposite. It'll start out bowed and then it'll look like an hourglass. I'm exaggerating how much it is, but it's a noticeable amount around the edges, especially wider angle zooms. like, you know, a 24 or an 18 or something like that, they tend to have this barrel distortion. So a single focal length lens would be your better choice, or an expensive zoom lens would work, because most of the more expensive zoom lenses are pretty well corrected. This particular zoom is extremely well corrected. I'm amazed at how well it works. So. Okay, so we now have everything lined up. That was the hardest part. Thank you. Okay, now we want to light our work, and we want it to be lit evenly. Now, if I were at my studio, I would have two great big soft boxes here with an expensive electronic strobe in each of them. And I would measure this angle and this distance so that each light should be the same distance and the same angle, and it should be approximately 45 degrees from the artwork. So what happens is when you have a light over here, the closest edge is the brightest, and the light falls off. So what you do is you put this light over here, and this is the brightest, and it falls off. And they fall off at the same rate, and it winds up like two wedges, and it's just flat. The lighting is even if you have the lights at the same distance, the same brightness, and at the same angle. They just lay on top of each other like two triangles, and it just makes a nice flat level of light.
What
Yes?
kind of bulbs are in the lamps?
I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, there are photo bulbs, these magic worm bulbs. The true photo bulbs will cost you about $20 a piece, and you need two of them. If you go to Lowe's, which is closer than the Grief Corps camera, you can buy these bulbs, which is what is in here. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, maybe some of you are, but these bulbs come in colors. They come in color temperatures, and they're called natural day lights. And on the back, so this is what you're going to look for, and on the back is the spectrum, and this shows you where this bulb falls on this spectrum. So if you go to Lowe's, look for this and this, and get the one that is as far to the right, or as far into the blue as you can get it. That's what's in here in these lights right now. And when you put these on in a house, if you walk into the room, you start looking for a skylight because it looks like natural light is coming in. If you take a picture with these, they will have a slightly green cast to them if your camera is set on daylight balance. So that brings up the next thing we're going to do, is we want to set our camera to the correct color of light that you're using so that your image will be as accurate as you can get it. So if you have a digital camera, no matter how small or large, possibly even some phone cameras, there's what they call a white balance setting in the camera. And they have preset settings of, fluorescent, shade, rain, sunny, daylight, and auto. But they also have one, at least in cameras, that's called custom white balance. Now every camera, the procedure to do that is slightly different. But on my camera, on any of the cameras, just which buttons you push, is you take a picture of a white card in the light that you want to balance it to. When your camera is set on the auto or on the custom white balance, and you push a button and the camera says, okay, if that's white, I have to do this to it to make it look white, and it will balance the color correction to whatever color your light is. Now, auto white balance will do a pretty good job, but if you want to do a really good job, you'll use the custom white balance on your camera. And it isn't very hard, but each camera is slightly different, so you have to read your manual on how to go about doing it.
On auto white, don't you have to do the same thing, hold the white thing up for the...
Not on auto, but on custom you do. I don't know how auto does it, but they do a really good job. I'm amazed at how well auto white balance usually balances the light. But in this case, both of my cameras, my Canon and this one, both have a slight green cast with these lights.
Hmm.
Even with, if I took a picture on auto white balance with this, you'd look at it and say, yeah, that's fine, that doesn't look bad. But if I put a piece of white paper in here, you'd say, yeah, I see there's a bit of a green cast to it. And you can correct that. Okay, so now we have color corrected our camera, and we bought cheap bulbs to do it with. And let's see, so we've set you should set your camera for the highest resolution you can. You'll have in the back of your camera, sometimes it's called size, and you want large. And there'll be something with compression, and you want that the least compression. And you're going to be using sRGB for your color setting, which is the standard color setting on the back of the camera. And the camera will probably have a setting that is called saturation. And you want the saturation to be neutral, because you can punch it up and your colors will just be wild and crazy. But if you're trying to accurately duplicate your art, you want your color saturation to be normal or neutral. Set the white balance, we already did that. Custom white balance your camera. And you're ready to go as far as that goes. Now the next thing you're going to have to worry about is, you don't want to do this if you can possibly help it, but if you can't help it and you have to shoot a piece of artwork with glass on it that's already framed with glass on it, best way to go about this is, one, turn all the lights down in the room except what is actually on the surface, so that the room is darkened, or at least a technical term of a couple of stops dimmer than what your surface is. A magic black card. You're looking through it. You have the rest of the room dark. And any reflection you're going to get off the surface is going to be a reflection of this black card. And as long as it's a continuous, even thing, you won't see it. You'll focus right through it, expose right through it. That's a last resort if you can't shoot it without glass. This is the way to do it. So you want the work to be vertical. You want the center of the work to be somewhere where it's going to be comfortable to work at. I mean, I could have the center down here, but I'd get a backache working with it. So I want it at a level that's comfortable to be working with. You want the artwork to be level so that it isn't hanging crooked. It'll drive you crazy if it's hanging crooked. When you frame the image, because the aspect ratio of your camera is usually 1 by 1.5. That's just a standard aspect ratio. Some cameras, like this one, you can do that. You can actually change the aspect ratio on the camera. You can change the settings of the camera to take a different angle picture. I don't bother with that. I leave it at 1 by 1.5. So what you're going to do is you're going to shoot loose, which also helps you with the precision of your lens, because any lens distortion or problems that you would have, especially with an inexpensive zoom, would be up in the corners where it would show. So by keeping this a little small, your image quality would be better in the center. And then you can put it on a computer or whatever and crop it and do what you want with it. And you've got the maximum quality of your lens is what you're using without any of the edges where there tends to be problem with lenses. Let's see, the Carpenter Square. Okay. So if you're going to be doing a bunch of this, several of these or something, I'd find a place, put the marks on the floor so that you don't have the problem of setting up and taking down and resetting all the time. If you just put the marks on the floor, you can come in and drop everything in place and just do as many of these as you want. Also, your camera white balance setting a lot of times, like my EOS 1, I can store 4 or 5 of those in the camera. So if I come up and I say, well, I already know what this is, I don't have to go through that procedure again. I just dial it in and there it is. Your camera may or may not have that feature that you can save your white balance setting, your custom white balance setting. And then, depending on whether you're going to print this yourself or send it out, I would send it to, again, what are you going to do with it? But, you know, if you're just going to email it to somebody, that's one thing. But if you're going to print it, I would send it to a pro lab, not Walmart or Walgreens or Kmart or something like that. Send it somewhere where they will actually tweak it and pay attention to what they're doing rather than just have an automatic machine cranking it out. And Amy could probably address that much better than I could as far as print quality is concerned.
Little secret, whoever you talk to in your photo lab, ask them if the last time they calibrated their equipment. And if they ask you what calibrate means,
Run.
Run.
Run. So here's another one that, you know, to me, digital photography, because I'm from the old school, I grew up using film. Digital photography is like a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't lend itself naturally to photography, you know, digital technology, but they've got just this big hammer and they keep hitting that square peg and knocking the edges off and driving it into the round hole. There's all kinds of inherent problems with digital photography that their only solution is, yeah, we'll work on some software. We got software to solve that problem. There's software to solve that problem. One of them is, and this one drives me crazy, I can make this camera and this picture as precise as I want it, and I put it in the computer and I call it up and it doesn't look the same. Because my screen isn't calibrated. I have to calibrate my screen to what? I don't know. And now the pro labs say, well, just email us the image. You get it all set the way you want it. Email us the image and we'll print it. I don't know what they're getting because my screen doesn't look like their screen. So we'll send you software to calibrate your computer to our system. Well, if you use 2 or 3 different places, calibrate your computer to our system. And you know, so it's just one of those things.
There's metadata on every file that has all kinds of things on it that I don't know what they do or what they are. But I wonder if that's what they, because you can go into something called information somewhere, depends on the software, but it'll give you this metadata. And it'll tell the date that the picture was taken, and it'll tell you what the resolution of your camera was at the time.
Yep, it'll even give you the serial number of the camera and all the settings. Yeah. And it's
in
pretty
fact,
easy.
I think it'll give you the GPS coordinates of where you took it.
Some of the newer cameras do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where they.
That metadata does not do anything for correcting between systems.
Yeah, it does.
Yes, sir.
If you experience that greenish hue,
Yes.
are there any filters available to screen that out or filter it out?
Well, if you have an SLR, you could conceivably put a magenta filter on it if you're getting a green cast, but you'd have to have a camera that would take filters like an SLR, yeah.
So, yeah, all the cameras have the capability of doing that built into them. So there wouldn't be a real reason to use like a gel filter. I used to use gel filters. The camera has that capability where you can just tweak it to just, you know, fractions of a color correction unit.
And that will do the job?
Exactly, yes. But you have to learn how to do that from your owner's manual. Inside this camera, there's a chart. It's a graph with an X in the middle of it, and it's like red, blue, yellow, green, and the dot, normal, neutral, is in the very center. And if you have a color cast, you can just move that dot somewhere in this color field take a picture and see what that did. And what you're doing is you're color correcting the image by trial and error, or if you had a color filter, but I mean a color meter. But so you try that, and if it doesn't work, if it gets you closer, you go there more. If it gets you the wrong way, you go the other way. And you move this thing around until you get the color exactly the way you want it, and then you leave it. And that's doing exactly what you're talking about with filters. You're filtering it electronically. So you have the white balance settings in your camera of, you know, cloudy, fluorescent, tungsten, auto, custom, and then if none of that works, you can go into this little graph that I just talked about and tweak it back at a funny angle.
When you're using that, do you turn overhead lights off? Or?
Yes, I do. I try to get the room as dark as I can because
okay.
that reduces glare, and I'm trying to color balance this to these lights, and those lights up there aren't the same color, so it drives you crazy. Which, by the way, sir, you were talking about these gel filters. That is still, today, there's nothing you can do but use those gel filters. So for certain situations, so let's say I'm using a flash on my camera, and I'm trying to balance this to the room so that when I take the picture, I want the room to look normal, but I want to flash someone in close. Well, my flash is a different color than the room lights. So what will happen is this person will look the correct color, but the rest of the room will look green or something. So the solution is you put a green filter on your flash so that your flash is the same color as the lights, and then you correct your camera, and you only have one color of light to deal with instead of two colors of light to deal with. And they still use gel filters for that purpose, because you can't do both with the camera at the same time. So they sell these gels, like if I were coming in here with my big strobes, my great big fancy studio strobes, it's the same thing. Unless I want to light every inch of the room with those strobes, I have to make the strobes the same color as whatever the ambient light is. So they sell these big filters to put over the big strobes to do the same thing.
Focused in North St. Louis County, Northside Art Association is a nonprofit 501c3 arts organization that serves local artists through community exposure, networking, education, and peer interaction. Learn more about Northside Art Association at www.northsideartassociation.org.